All right, welcome into Surviving Paradise, the podcast that takes a sometimes serious, oftentimes humorous look at the claim by Jehovah's Witnesses that we are living in a modern day spiritual paradise. I am your host, Stacy Bauman, former elder, ministerial servant, sometimes pioneered, sometimes not. Most importantly, a little guy, a kid raised as one of Jehovah's Witnesses throughout the 70s and 80s. As every episode begins, I like to issue a warning. We try to have some fun here. There's healing, laughter, tears. Sometimes it gets very intense, but please know that the sarcasm, humor, and any and every other experience and emotion is mine, all mine, and it is never meant to offend. I want to welcome and thank everyone for joining us in our spiritual paradise. I want to confess as I start this week that I don't watch much TV. And sometimes it hits me that that's strange, considering as a kid I watched a lot of TV. I was very active, but especially on Saturdays. You got Saturday morning cartoons. We had Abbott and Costello for the old folks that remember them. And then we had Soul Train, which I really, really miss, by the way. But today I don't watch much TV. I am, however, guilty of having all the streaming services, Netflix, HBO, Max. I guess it's Max now. I've got the Amazon Prime service. In full disclosure, I have no clue why. I really don't. I don't watch a lot of TV. People ask me about shows and actors and up-to-date pop celebrities, and I find that I'm somewhat ignorant on all that stuff. I guess it's also fair to admit that I have the attention span of a gnat. And that is the truth. So if I sit to watch something, it has to grab me quickly. It's got to grab me and hold me in the first few minutes. And I got to tell you, for those in my closest circle, no one likes watching movies or TV with me. I'm a pain to be around. Even when I promise not to say anything, they all look to me and see the eye roll. The last time I can remember really enjoying a show on television was Netflix. And it was Stranger Things, which I am a huge fan of. Absolutely loved that show. Not a shock considering I was a kid from the 1980s. That show was so good. The music, all of it. Anyway, the last really big show recognizable to anyone else that I really enjoyed. But the other night, I had some time and I sat down and did something I rarely ever do. Planted my butt on the couch, I picked up the remote control, and I started living on the edge, at least by my standards, by opening Netflix. And I got to tell you, what a nightmare. If surfing every single category, frowning, talking to the television, and walking away exhausted counts as watching TV, well, that was my experience. That's why I don't watch it that much. Seriously, what the hell with Netflix? Everything on there is doom and gloom. Crime, murder, cheating. There's all kinds of things featuring the end of the world. There's a whole section of doomsday movies. How in the world do people do this? The whole Netflix and chill thing. I blew almost an hour surfing that stupid app, and that was 90% of everything that I saw on there. Doom. And I got to admit, if I sound like get off my lawn guy, well, guilty. I'm getting to that age. I don't know half the actors, never heard of these shows, and I had zero desire to watch another end of the world movie. I am not entertained. And so I turned it off. But in that process, it hit me. I hate all of that stuff, all that subject matter, that end of the world, doom and gloom, Armageddon, everything's going to blow up and die stuff, because I lived it. I lived it for over 40 years as a Jehovah's Witness. My entire life, my entire way of thinking was all centered around doomsday crap. From the time I was a little boy until the day I left my very last meeting at the Kingdom Hall. Doom, gloom, the world is ending, you're all going to die, and the hero is always being the same 9 guys in upstate New York. I had never before put a second of thought to it, but there's a reason I don't watch those movies or shows. I've lived it. I've done that before. I even actually taught it to other people, which is so embarrassing. My every waking moment was believing that doomsday was seconds away, and it created a feeling of endless fear and hypervigilance, even at times when you don't realize it as a witness. It created a world where literally nothing mattered. It was so nihilistic. I didn't need college. I didn't need a retirement fund. I didn't need to care about owning a home. It was all going bye-bye via a sanctioned genocide courtesy of Jehovah, his son, and the 9 guys they chose in upstate New York. Now, call me crazy, and it's fair because I am, but when I want to drain my brain on some entertainment, reviewing end-of-the-world stories just doesn't do it for me. And even now, 14 years after leaving, you discover a few scars that you didn't realize you had. And that's what happened. Just surfing through all the movies made me realize how much I hate it all. And while I've covered the subject of Armageddon on many episodes of this crazy show in the past, it inspired me to take a deeper look at my own feelings on this subject and my own thoughts. And that's really what happens on this show. And by extension, the implications of growing up with doom being a consistent part of my daily life. Each time I land on these thoughts, I realize it's almost impossible to capture what impending doom does to people. But make no mistake, Jehovah's Witnesses are infatuated with doomsday scenarios that keeps an estimated 8 million of them on pins and needles, even if it's only subconsciously. But in my opinion, it's much more subconscious in nature, at least for the vast majority of them, as each and every decision you make as a witness is based on the inevitable. This all ends in worldwide death and mayhem, a lot like most of the movies currently running on Netflix. Fire, brimstone, destruction, everybody's dead, only a small number live. I lived it all before. As we look at Jehovah's Witnesses' fascination with doomsday and mass destruction, keep in mind that this is also taught to their children. The highly impressionable minds of innocent kids are force-fed a steady diet of impending doom and destruction with no guarantee that they or anyone they love is even going to survive it. And I can say this because I lived it. I was a witness from the time I was 4 or 5 years old until the time I left 14 years ago. I know what it feels like. I know how I thought, and I know I wasn't alone. With that said, Jehovah's Witnesses don't see themselves as doomsdayers. No, no, no. Jehovah's Witnesses consider themselves the purveyors of good news, and they don't believe in doomsday. Their message is one of good news. From the Watchtower of December 1st, 1999, page 9, we are told this, quote, Jehovah's Witnesses are not an apocalyptic sect or a doomsday cult. In their public witnessing, God's servants focus mainly on the wonderful hope set out in the Bible. Thus, they do not add or take anything away from the prophetic words found therein. End quote. Want to go sideways? So aside from the claim that they don't add or take anything away from the Bible, subject for another show, see past episodes, they can't escape the fact that the Bible is itself a book filled with violence and doomsday messaging. There's movies about it. There's movies on Netflix about it right now. And witnesses, despite their messaging, don't see themselves as apocalyptic or as a doomsday cult. Whether it's Cain whacking Abel from the very beginning of the Bible, or a flood drowning everyone, including babies and puppies, or angels killing people, or wars in the Promised Land, or even Jesus' brutal death itself, the us versus them doomsday stuff is in almost every book of their playbook, otherwise known as the Bible. And the governing body has leveraged that messaging to get millions of people to obey them, give them their money, and even check their brains at the door. They claim the imminent slaughter of billions isn't really their message. It's not really what our message is. Sort of like, yeah, I don't know, picking that pretty flower you see over there, the one that's sprouting up in between all those piles of dead bodies. But isn't the flower pretty? Yeah. They ignore all the stuff that they don't want you to think they believe in. And it's all doomsday, apocalyptic, mass destruction messaging. So make no mistake, the entire religion revolves around an impending doom and destruction, a terrifying ending to everyone and everything that you and I can see and know. And I'll tell you, the fear of Armageddon is the motivating force in a Jehovah's Witness's life. Knowing it's about to hit the planet any second now shapes the rest of a witness's reality, which completely and fully revolves around strict obedience to 9 guys in New York they don't really know who claim to be leading them out of the very impending doom they can't wait to happen. But it gets worse. They actually believe that informing their neighbors that Jehovah's Witnesses are right, everyone else is wrong, believe what we believe, or die is a good message. They call it good news. When a Jehovah's Witness speaks of the good news or their hope for the future, it includes the following. And again, for emphasis, they consider this to be good news and in no way identifies them as a doomsday cult. From the Bible Teachings, Bible Questions section of their website, we are told this, quote, "What will conditions be like during the Battle of Armageddon? While we do not know how God will use his power, he will have at his disposal weapons, such as those he has used in the past: hail, earthquake, flooding downpour, fire and sulfur, lightning, and disease. In confusion, at least some of God's enemies will kill each other. Yet they will ultimately realize that it is God who is fighting against them." End quote. Remember, they're not a doomsday cult. They don't get excited about impending doom and destruction. Nonetheless, they want you to know that Jehovah's going to use all the natural elements against you, and you might even turn and start killing the guy next door. From the Watchtower of 1981, August 1st, pages 26 through 30, the article, "Will God Execute the Wicked?" Habakkuk answers yes. It says there, quote, "In the near future, as Jehovah marches to the war of the great day of God the Almighty at Armageddon, he will bring death upon many of his enemies by the nonviolent, silent means of execution, pestilence. It will then be dangerous, fatal, to get in the way of Jehovah's line of march to victory. For ahead of his steps he will send the pestilence, behind his heels he will leave victims afflicted with death-dealing, burning fever. For his destruction of the wicked, Jehovah has more kinds of weapons in his divine army. At the disposal of the Creator are flash floods to engulf the enemies. Waters from the skies can pour down in a thunderstorm. Moreover, the waters deep within the earth can be made to spout up, as if the deep were lifting up its hands on high to play a part in the destruction of the wicked." It continues, back to the quote, "Jehovah's superhuman weapons of war make certain that no enemy will escape. Not one of the wicked will get away. Roaring thunderbolts and crackling lightnings are at Jehovah's disposal. At the flashing of God's means of death to his enemies, the light will be so intense by day and night that the natural sun and moon will, as it were, feel themselves not needed for illumination. What? It will be as if they stood still, not functioning as light bearers, but letting Jehovah's radiant missiles put on a display of an illuminating power. Jehovah's larger weapon, like a spear, will be sent streaking through the air and brightening the battlefield. Imagine the mental effect on foes of Jehovah and his people. End quote. Is now a good time to remind you that this is not a doomsday cult. It is not excited about impending destruction. But we're learning a thing or two about Jehovah, aren't we? And what we can look forward to in the future. All the natural elements will be on display as he waxes the very people he created. It's really an incredible set of messaging that a Jehovah's Witness faces from day one. If you're born in, this hits you early. If you learn about it later and you're in a Bible study program, they make sure you know this. This is the end of the story. But how about another reference in what is going to be, candidly, warning, a reference-heavy episode? How about this? From the Awake of 2005, July 8th, pages 12 through 13, Should You Fear Armageddon? On page 13, we get this, quote, Granted, a number of Bible prophecies of the coming destruction are alarming. Wait a minute, what destruction? I thought we were in a doomsday cult. For example, the prophet Joel spoke of the great and fear-inspiring day of Jehovah. God's arsenal includes snow, hail, earthquake, infectious disease. This isn't the first time that's mentioned. Apparently, Jehovah's going to hit people with diseases. Flooding downpour, rain of fire and sulfur. That's a favorite in Watchtower illustrations. Deadly confusion, lightning, and probably my favorite, a flesh-rotting scourge. And the Bible graphically describes a time in which the dead will cover the surface of the earth, left either as manure or as food for the birds and other animals. Fright will grip God's enemies during this war. End quote. I could keep going. But if you're thinking to yourself, or you're a bit uncomfortable because this all sounds too familiar, and you're thinking, I thought there was some good news in here. Oh yeah, there's some good news. But it all lives in the same bucket with flesh-rotting scourges for those who don't want to hear the good news. I could keep going on with so many more references found on their website at this late time and hour. But remember, this is all good news, and Jehovah's Witnesses aren't a doomsday cult. And so when you wonder why you don't necessarily enjoy storylines, movies, or you cringe at the thought of this stuff because you were raised a Jehovah's Witness, wonder no more. Grab your popcorn and settle in to watch impending doom at the hands of Jehovah himself. Seen the movie, got the t-shirt. And one of the many ironies on this subject is that Jehovah's Witnesses don't believe they're living in a doomsday cult. They can read, those were just 3 references I gave you on their website, just 3. There are so many more. They can read that stuff and come away going, oh, we don't believe in doomsday. Jehovah's, no. I mentioned the December 1999 reference earlier, but in September of 2012, they actually released a series of Awake articles that started with one of their most ironic titles ever. The title was this: The Fascination with Doomsday. And at the risk of too many references or dissecting one mind-blowing set of articles, I have to tell you, I'm going to share with you shocking examples in cognitive dissonance. Because they can print these kinds of articles, they can put illustrations and photographs in them, they can actually start to kind of kick other people for being fascinated with doomsday, all without realizing that they themselves are fascinated with doomsday. And it can really leave a person confused until their brain starts to break free. I'm going to hear for the next few minutes share some of the comments from that series, The Awake of September 2012, The Fascination with Doomsday. But as I read some of these, for those of us that have been around a while, were raised and left, or maybe still in and considering, see if you don't notice a thing or two. September 2012 Awake, quote, "Does the future make you nervous? If so, you are not alone. From ancient times, people have speculated about the things to come, and many have concluded that the outlook is not exactly rosy." End quote for a moment. Let me return to the quote. First, quote, "The prospect of doomsday or the end of the world has intrigued and fascinated people for millenniums." End quote. Can you think of anyone you know that's been especially intrigued with that message, with the end of the world? Indeed, some would say that since 1874, with the pyramid-loving Chuck Taze Russell, Jehovah's Witnesses have been pretty intrigued with doomsday end of the world commentary. But it continues, and with this next quote, I'm guessing the governing body might just also have a Netflix subscription. It continues here, quote, "Consider, for example, recent fiction, comics, TV, hundreds of movies, and thousands of books weave tales of impending doom. There seems to be no end to the forces ready to pounce upon and lay waste to humanity. Killer robots, monsters of all sorts, aliens, zombies, ghosts, dragons, apes, birds, mutant rats, and giant wasps. Hardly would anyone take such stories seriously." End quote. I think somebody's been surfing Netflix. September 2012 Awake. That's a direct quote. But oh, the irony of this quote. The rest of mankind, including you and I, are misguided when it comes to all things doomsday and who's going to destroy all of humanity. Silly people. No one believes in robots or monsters or aliens or ghosts or giant wasps. Why? Because Jehovah's real doomsday is way better. You see, it's coming with a rock-solid 144,000 ancient people, we don't know their names, including some characters from the Bible we'd recognize. It includes some invisible spirit creatures whose real kryptonite and weakness is human women. Oh, and then there's the 9 guys you can currently watch on JW Broadcasting until they get, called up to do this whole job at the impending doom. What? They're taking a jab at people who are watching end-of-the-world movies and entertainment without realizing that theirs is just as absurd. The article continues with them debunking everything from comets hitting the Earth to planets imploding and a whole bunch of other nonsense I'm not going to get into because, again, Jehovah's doomsday is reasonable. It's something you can put faith in. It's real. Not like that stuff you see surfing on the streaming services, not the comic books. But the same article then goes on to drop this nugget where it says, quote, "Persuaded by similar predictions of disasters, some have built shelters in their backyard or at considerable expense have reserved quarters in underground community bunkers." End quote. And even as I read that reference, I found myself thinking, I guess they forgot about that time Judge Joe Rutherford had a bomb shelter in San Diego. Shrugs, I don't know. They must have forgot. The person who wrote this probably wasn't alive or even born, but faithful and discreet slave and stuff, food at the proper time and stuff. And then, the religion and its 9 kings that claims they're not a doomsday cult go on in this article to tease us. They give us a teaser with the following comment, quote, "It would be a mistake, however, to conclude that humanity faces no peril or that only the gullible believe that doomsday is something more than the stuff of fiction and fantasy. Will doomsday really come? If so, how and when?" End quote. Wait a minute. Wait right here. Mankind's facing peril? There is doomsday. I don't want to be gullible. And listen, I thought you'd already told us you weren't a doomsday cult. Are you about to tell me, this one guy or anybody listening, that there is in fact a danger on its way? There is a doomsday? Yeah, yeah, we are. Because the doomsday of the governing body of Jehovah's Witnesses and their message is better than anything else you've considered. Anything you could surf on Netflix, or anything scientists or people hiding in bunkers would give you. Sure, it's still a doomsday message, but not really. I mean, it's not really a doomsday message. The article continues, quote, apart from being utterly pessimistic, the foregoing doomsday scenarios have three things in common. First, they are based on the speculation of men. And humans have a far from perfect record when it comes to guessing the future. You don't say, governing body. Back to the quote. Second, human survival, if possible, would be a matter of chance. Third, survivors of a post-doomsday world would have a real struggle to stay alive. In contrast, the Bible's version of what the future holds paints a more reasonable picture. According to the Bible, for a certainty, a great change is coming. But survival is guaranteed to all who do God's will, end quote. And you know what that means. We don't talk about doomsday. We call it a great change. We don't talk about mass slaughter and genocide. We just describe the forces of nature killing people, scourges, and flesh rotting. And if you want to survive this, you got to be someone doing God's will. I'll give you one guess who that means. One guess. You got to be a baptized Jehovah's Witness. But what a quote from the 2012 Awake series. Do I really need to expound on the comment they make there about men speculating about the future and their high failure rate? Who has a few hours to discuss, I don't know, speculation of men starting with some guy named Chuck Taze, moving to Judge Joe, and wrapping it up with today's 9 guys speculating for well over a century? Put that aside when it comes to doomsday messages. The Bible is your touchstone, and it's reasonable. It's reasonable. Anything you see on Netflix and the stuff I just surfed right over, that's stupid fiction. Their stuff found in the Bible is what they call reasonable. For example, for those of us that remember the good book, things like Joshua taking over for Moses and then, I don't know, moving forward over X amount of years, slaughtering women, children, and livestock because, well, they were guilty of being on his property, otherwise known as the Promised Land, and he wanted his land back. It was reasonable. And then, of course, advancing through the book of the Bible on all things doomsday, all the way up to Revelation, arguably the book most people would say is most doomsday, where the governing body claims that if we don't agree with somebody like Jeffrey Jackson, he's going to be involved in spreading our guts out for the birds to eat. It's all very reasonable, according to this Awake series, wouldn't you say? But the Awake of 2012, and why am I pounding this in? Because this is what witnesses are taught, and they carry it with them in life. Back to that series of articles, it wraps it all up with this, quote, many people, though, have a problem accepting such Bible predictions. Skeptics view as fantasy the Bible's teachings about a great tribulation, Armageddon, a millennium, and paradise. These concepts have been endlessly discussed, debated, and interpreted by theologians. Their theories compete and clash with one another. End quote. So as you can see, Jehovah's version of doomsday and mass mayhem and destruction is better than everyone else's, according to the governing body. And while you can't believe everything you watch on Netflix when it comes to all things end of the world, That's just a fantasy after all. The details given to Jehovah's Witnesses from the governing body are rock solid. They can count on them. Things like the Great Tribulation, Armageddon, some thousand-year reign called the Millennium. Then, after all of that, a paradise, courtesy of the guys that claim they're not actually part of a doomsday cult, but have built an entire religion around a coming doomsday and have been predicting that doomsday would happen since 1874. Aliens, robots, ghosts, comets, those are all nonsense. Surf past them. The Bible, however, is rock solid, with its talking animals, giants, burning bushes that talk to you, invisible people, demons, and dragons. Nope, that version of doomsday, well, hey, for a Jehovah's Witness, they learn early, that's something you can truly believe in. Jehovah's version is better. And aside from the stunning irony and ignorance of a doomsday organization trying to claim they aren't a doomsday organization, only to then print a series of articles on doomsday that end with them saying, doomsday is coming, but we can save you. Aside from all of that insanity, there is the important reality of this subject. And that reality is it harms people. It's fun to talk about, and it makes you laugh, at least it does me. It might irritate you, my style on this little show. But the real harsh reality of this stuff is that this actually has an impact on people's psyches. This harms people. The Jehovah's Witness version of doomsday has a dramatic impact on a Jehovah's Witness. And might I add, as is my soft spot, particularly children. It starts early for a witness. For those that grew up a Jehovah's Witness, you undoubtedly know what I speak of. A constant sense of dread. Look, I know that when you're eating a bowl of ice cream watching cartoons, you're not thinking about this, but I also don't want anyone to ignore the voice and the sound in the background that lives in the life of a Jehovah's Witness. You really want to ride bikes with the kids in the neighborhood, but you also contemplate how they're all going to be dead soon and you're going to watch it. Not kidding. I know I'm not alone in thinking that. I get notes from people. Some kids tune this messaging out. Some of them go to the Kingdom Hall, they look at the books that are plopped in their laps, and they just tune it out. But then again, there are other personalities, this guy included, that took it all in and took it all very seriously. And it had a painful impact on my innocent, developing brain as a little person. And so if it can happen to me, when you know you're nothing special, you know it can happen to other people too. And especially little people with Jehovah's doomsday message. When that cute little person comes to your door in the field service or hands you something from their book cart as you walk on by, they really believe in their minds and hearts that you have to take what they're giving you, or you're dead. You're a dead man walking. And I got to tell you, it hurts them. It hurts them. And even as they grow to adulthood, there's still this impending fear. You know the one I speak of, even for people who have left or have been disfellowshipped or have been out for years, that little niggling voice that for some people never goes away that says, well, what if they're right? What if they're right? That's the effect of this doomsday messaging that a witness faces throughout their life. Where do they get it from? It's everywhere in their culture. They've seen the images in the literature. For little people, they've read the Bible stories book, filled with blood and mayhem. Their parents, as they've grown older and in just passing conversations, have passed on the detail of what they call good news to them. The good news is everybody around you that isn't one of us is dead. But I'll tell you, Jehovah's version of doomsday has another deeper impact that can follow a Jehovah's Witness throughout their life. even into advanced adulthood. At least that's been my opinion and experience. You can end up living your entire life in a state of impending doom. For those raised in the doomsday world of Jehovah's Witnesses, how did you ever react to your first thunderstorm? Does anyone know what I'm poking at here? It usually happens when we're kids, right? A thunderstorm, lightning, and the crashing thunder in the sky. Anybody remember that first thunderstorm as a kid? Well, the first one is scary for any little person. They have no clue what's going on. It really takes on new meaning when you're a Jehovah's Witness kid and you hear that boom in the sky. For many of them, the first thought is, oh no, Jehovah is here. This is it. I laugh at that, but in all seriousness, for a kid, if you've ever seen a little person terrified out of their mind, there is nothing funny about it. It is awful to see. Your first reaction is to bring them comfort, to get them calmed down. It isn't funny. I remember as a kid, I grew up in earthquake country in the Bay Area. We had an earthquake drill. We had earthquake drills in school the entire time I was alive, or in school, I should say. We had to get under our desks. It was something that we practiced at least once a month in our classes. If an earthquake come, get under the desk. Looking back on that, God, that was nuts, wasn't it? I've even lived through earthquakes, including a really big one, perhaps many consider the big one in Los Angeles in 1972. I remember it plain as day being in my bedroom. I doubt I'm the only one, but a little Jehovah's Witness first thought when something like that happens is game over. Jehovah's here, we're doomed, this is Armageddon. And it's just a feeling of fight or flight and fear. And look, I don't want to get into psychology because I play one on the podcast, but I am not a licensed psychologist. But they will tell you that when you get fight or flight and traumatic responses at a young age, they can trigger throughout your life. And I'll tell you, I remember those earthquakes that whole time. This was actually before I even realized I was a little enemy of God, since I wasn't baptized. Thank you, Stephen Lett, in recent years. But the constant reminder that Doomsday, otherwise known as Armageddon, might be here any second now, lived deep in my psyche as a kid, and I know it does others. Other people just call it fear, and that's really what it is. I've shared a few references showing this messaging in their publications on other shows covering other subjects, but it barely scratches the surface of what a witness is exposed to. They pound home a coming doomsday in far more effective methods now. Don't get me started on all the publications for kids. I reference them a lot. My book of Bible stories, my book of horror stories, just unbelievable, from 1978. Or who can forget the recent Caleb and Sophia video where they actually showed Noah not listening to Jehovah, so he didn't build an ark, and so they show Noah drowning in the flood right next to his family and the animals. Because he didn't listen to Jehovah, his doomsday's better after all. And none of it stops there. The publications have become infamous, featuring endless illustrations of death and mayhem going back decades. I predict, by the way, that this is going to soften with all their new efforts to rebrand the religion. But it's too late for what's happened in the past. And in more recent times, they've gone so far as to recreate in full-scale video productions and dramas violence, doom, persecution, weapons, children in these video scenes shown at the conventions clutching their parents as gunmen crash into the room. There's one scene from a few years ago in the convention with a bunch of witnesses, including kids, in a field as they're in a circle while a circle of soldiers pointing machine guns at them close in on them. But hey, how about some good news from the non-doomsday cult? Welcome to our district convention program. It's really incredible. And I don't think it's a thought that could be pounded home enough. That witnesses, maybe people you love that you just can't understand why they think or feel the way they do, are subjected to this stuff. This is the end of their story, folks. In full confession, I beat this dead horse a lot because of the unspeakable damage it does to people. It was on my mind all week. While governments and everyday people sit back and barely give Jehovah's Witnesses a second thought, there are actually an estimated 8 million people who are actually voluntarily subjecting themselves to a daily diet of doom. Doomsday, death, and mayhem. It's not nearly as mundane as choosing a show on Netflix and falling asleep before the world blows up on your flat screen, only to awaken and see the closing credits. Now, I've just outed myself what happens when I watch TV. Jehovah's Witnesses live their entire lives exposing themselves to messages of death and destruction. Period. It's a fact. Only to be told it's all okay. Take a look at this picture of people playing with puppies in paradise and eating a plant-based diet. Isn't this great? The net result is a form of gaslighting and trauma that is nothing more than, in my opinion, a subtle destruction of a person's soul. The reminder on who is impacted by their version of a not coming but yet coming doomsday is the question, who's going to be part of this doomsday? Well, in case you're wondering, the answer is simple. I won't belabor it. No, everyone who's not a Jehovah's Witness, if you approach one at a book cart this weekend, they'll tell you, oh, no, Jehovah reads hearts. Just know that that's an urban myth they tell themselves to comfort themselves. The proof is this. Why would they preach? If Jehovah's reading hearts, what's the point of the preaching work? Isn't it to save people from an incoming destruction? All the people who aren't Jehovah's Witnesses? Yeah, it is. But you can literally look into the eyes of a Jehovah's Witness and realize how painful it is. Oh, no, Jehovah reads hearts. It won't just be Jehovah's Witnesses. Yeah, well, that's why you preach, to get us baptized and be Jehovah's Witnesses so we won't be killed. Kids, babies, puppies, anybody that didn't accept a Bible study with Jehovah's Witnesses or took a book from their book cart and then went on to get baptized as a Jehovah's Witness. It's stunning. And while I mentioned that this is somewhat repetitive, I've covered this subject and you can't get away from it in almost anything about their world, I think it bears repeating. But while the governing body is printing articles debunking that they're doomsday propagandists or doomsday thinking, even as they go on to preach about a doomsday, I just read it to you, there are so many more details regarding Jehovah's doomsday that only add to the absurdity and the emotional and psychological damage it does to people. And so, what has been a staple in this crazy show, and I'm starting to get back to it, I want to consider some of my random thoughts and observations, in this case, on Jehovah's version of doom and destruction. How about this one? The Watchtower of July 15th, 1990, page 18, where we're told this, quote, mentally blinded ones do not want to believe. Their unbelief opens up their mind to invasion by the demons. What? They cannot see Jehovah's glory or its reflection from the countenance of Jesus, the greater Moses, end quote. Mentally blind ones have opened their minds to demons. Here we go again. The Awake of 2012, you might remember just moments ago I read it to you, tells us that robots, ghosts, aliens, giant wasps, they're all fantasy. They're fiction. But, well, invisible demons invading your mind, that's reality. Silly people that believe in aliens in an ever-expanding universe, who knows? However, we believe in invisible spirit creatures that couldn't resist female boobs. So they left heaven, they learned how to sleep and poop, they watched their giant kids with spirit creature DNA drowned in the flood, they somehow missed the invisible gene, no one can explain how, and now those negligent fathers invade people's minds, otherwise known as demons. Evidently. It's just another stunning example of what witnesses are exposed to. And don't fool yourself. This leads to people, some who might be suffering from an honest to goodness mental illness, questioning the thoughts in their head. Is a demon in there? This doomsday situation, is demons inside my head? But maybe you've never considered why Armageddon and a future of doom is so popular with the governing body of Jehovah's Witnesses. To set the stage, imagine one day you live on a lake in upstate New York. You don't have to work. You have people cook for you every meal, and you recently decided to grow a beard. It's a pretty good life. I mean, what do you really have to look forward to? You already have it all, right? Well, I'll tell you what those 9 guys are looking forward to. Remember, Stephen Lett, Sam Hurd, David Splain, and Jeffrey Jackson, Mark Sanderson, Garrett Loesch, all those guys are eagerly awaiting a day they said was coming in 1874, hasn't shown up yet, where they will be joined by Jesus' mother Mary and maybe Mary Magdalene in an all-out slaughter of all humanity, and especially those people that didn't believe in the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society. That's right. The guys in upstate New York currently on the resort-like compound, they're waiting for doomsday. They're waiting to be called home, to do the job, to finish the job. From the Watchtower of 1980, November 15th, pages 30 through 31, questions from the readers, my kind of people, we get this, quote, "At Armageddon, there will be relief at the revelation of the Lord Jesus from heaven with his powerful angels, repaying tribulation to those who make tribulation for worshipers of God. This will mean destruction for these persecutors and opposers." Note this, quote, Revelation 2:26 and 27 shows that resurrected, anointed ones, as part of the seed of God's heavenly wifely organization, will be associated with Christ Jesus in bringing this destruction on the wicked. End quote. So there you have it. The 9 guys in New York that are currently prominently featured on JW Broadcasting, some of them with weird voices and even weirder facial expressions, those guys are going to get in on the action. But as mentioned, the 9 guys in New York won't be alone. Despite them allowing Jehovah's Witnesses to be harmed and killed while they watched on, kind of like a doomsday movie on Netflix, the invisible spirit creatures, I should say, who are in constant danger of getting weak in the knees for you ladies, they too join the 9 guys in New York and get in on the fun. Some would call it doom, but they're not a doomsday cult, right? Right. That's right. Back to the angels. From the Watchtower of 2007, March 15th, pages 21 through 25, in a series of articles entitled Angels, How They Affect Mankind, we've already learned that Stephen Lett gets to kill people in the non-doomsday doomsday scenario. So do some invisible guys who really like our ladies. Quote, angels will serve as God's executional forces in the near future. Very soon now, Jesus will come with his powerful angels in a flaming fire. Their mission will be to bring vengeance upon those who do not know God and those who do not obey the good news about our Lord Jesus. What an effect this action will have on mankind. Those who refuse to respond to the good news of God's kingdom now being declared earthwide will suffer destruction. Only those who seek Jehovah, righteousness, and meekness will be concealed in the day of Jehovah's anger and be unharmed. End quote. So there it is. If you're keeping track at home, Jesus is coming. He's bringing all resurrected anointed ones. That includes the 9 guys in upstate New York that we currently watch on video, and then the invisible guys who didn't give in to you ladies way back before the flood. They're all coming, and if people aren't connected to Jehovah, and you guessed it, the organization the 9 guys that are about to kill them started, they're not going to be alive. They'll be harmed. And I always amazed at some of this stuff. With the anointed who are currently in heaven, including Chuck Taze Russell and Judge Joe Rutherford and Nathan Knorr, allegedly, those guys would watch on. They couldn't help a Jehovah's Witness kid that was being bullied in school, or the one who was in danger from a predator at their very own kingdom halls. But hey, not only those anointed ones, but also the angels, they can suddenly spring to action when it comes time to kill women and children that didn't believe the governing body of Jehovah's Witnesses were anything more than a bunch of scammers. Suddenly, they're ready to rock and roll. But before your current neighbors, friends, or the nice old lady next door are hit by fire or lightning or their skin rots off their face, the governing body tells us that they're all going to know who it is that is executing them and why. This is one of my favorite random points. Like a celestial announcement from the clouds, that kid next door, or again, that little old lady down the street, will be informed that they're in fact being slaughtered because they weren't Jehovah's Witnesses and didn't recognize somebody like Steve Lett as being a king. Would you like proof? From the Pure Worship of Jehovah publication, Restored at Last, page 198, note this, quote, "Before they are destroyed, our enemies will see the sign of the Son of Man like a supernatural manifestation of the power of Jehovah and Jesus. The opposers will see things that cause them extreme anxiety. As Jesus foretold, people will become faint out of fear and expectation of the things coming upon the inhabited earth. To their horror, they will realize that they miscalculated when they attacked Jehovah's people. They will be forced to know the Creator in his role as military commander, Jehovah of armies. Jehovah will no doubt unleash heavenly armies and natural forces in such a way that he protects his loyal servants, but eliminates his enemies." End quote. Because after all, when you're ushering in paradise, well, only kinda, it's still about 1,000 years away because there's this Millennium Thing, if you understand Jehovah's Witness timelines. You want to make sure that the person you're about to slaughter, or those you're slaughtering, that won't even be in the paradise and won't know anything in just a matter of seconds, knows and is fully aware that it was you killing them. That's right. You heard it right here from the Pure Worship of Jehovah book, page 198. They must know that they're being slaughtered by Jehovah, the 9 guys in upstate New York, all sorts of other people making up 144,000, and some invisible spirit creatures who resisted our women. Are they supposed to commit this to memory? Oh, I'm being slaughtered because I didn't recognize Jehovah's Witnesses. Are they supposed to commit that to memory? A memory that won't even exist in a matter of seconds after they're dead? It all makes perfect sense, right? But damn it, you better know it was Jehovah's Witnesses all along. And, well, goodbye now. It's straight insanity. And it's just one of those things that once you have time to reflect on it, you realize, my God, what? First, you claim you don't like doom and gloom, that destruction isn't your end message. Then you want to be sure that we know that if we're being killed, you were the one doing it, and why does it matter? I'll be dead. It's yet another example of the bizarre gaslighting, the bizarre and absurd man-made doctrines, policies, teachings, and urban myths that impact the life of a Jehovah's Witness. They grow up believing this crap. But finally, and to land the point that a Jehovah's Witness lives in constant fear of this doom and gloom, in a constant state of fight or flight, consider yet another reference in a reference-heavy episode. Quote, or should I say, excuse me, The Awake of 2005, July 8th, pages 12 through 13, aptly titled, Should You Fear Armageddon? I mean, who would? It sounds like a fun time. We get this quote: When a severe typhoon or hurricane is approaching, local authorities provide warnings for the protection of life. To ensure that everyone hears the alert, police might even be dispatched with warning systems or be sent from door to door. The purpose of all of this is not to terrify people, but to help them to take life-saving action. Discerning individuals receive the warning gladly, and those who respond positively are happy for having done so. It is similar with God's warning message about the imminent storm wind of Armageddon. It's similar? Quote, Jehovah has provided details about his war in his written word. His desire is not to terrify, but to give fair warning and lead people to repent and make a determined effort to serve him. Those who take such action will be blessed with survival. End quote. Just a loaded paragraph. And if it doesn't present to you in blunt fashion what a Jehovah's Witness faces and what's planted in their heads, I don't know what will. But a couple of things here based on this reference from 2005. One, am I the only one just shaking my head in disbelief that his purpose isn't to terrify anyone? Which is exactly why they went into grim details of flesh falling off our faces, lightning storms, hurricane, hail, and fire eating us all up, or the grim detail on how birds are going to eat our intestines, and made sure that you could visualize this doomsday scenario in a lot of their Watchtower illustrations, as a matter of fact. They go on to say, just a fair warning. That's what Jehovah was giving. But this is what it looks like. Hint, hint. Jehovah doesn't mean to terrify you. The book of Revelation is a nursery story. It's a nursery rhyme. But the second thing that jumps out at me at this reference, let's discuss their whole concept of timing and warning. I got to confess, I did pretty good on illustrations in the theocratic school, and the writer of this article obviously didn't. They compared Armageddon to an incoming hurricane or typhoon, and the authorities doing all they can to communicate impending doom to their citizens. But when a storm is coming, there is usually visible proof. And well, the key point is this. When you're not a doomsday cult, but you're warning people of impending doom for well over 100 years, even pinpointing dates and times, and the hurricane and doom never show up, what exactly do we make of that? Do weathermen predict a hurricane or earthquake decades in advance even matter? If someone comes to you and tells you a hurricane is coming in 10 years, 44 days, and 7 hours from now, do you jump and run for cover at this exact moment? It's 10 years off. This inspired writer of this article in The Awake missed some obvious details comparing an earth-wide genocide that gets everybody absolutely destroyed and killed to a hurricane that rolls into the Midwest. I'd like to point the 9 guys in New York to an equally inspired guy from classical literature, otherwise known as Aesop, of Aesop's Fables. He had this little story about a boy who cried wolf. The irony of a group of men whose entire platform, religion, and power finds its foundation in incoming doom and destruction for anyone that doesn't believe them, and then saying they don't do it, might be one of the greatest examples of gaslighting in the history of man. But they keep going. On all things timing and warning, in a world where doomsday is apparently not taught to Jehovah's Witnesses, right? We get this from the same article under the subheading, It is nearer than they think. Quote, what is this that is so near? Why, if you have not heard, it is the day of Jehovah's vindication. the day when mankind's enemies and oppressors will be destroyed at Armageddon, the day when all of God's howling foes will bite the dust in bitter anguish in the battle of God Almighty. A triumphant day indeed, a time when lovers of righteousness will see not only the day of doom come upon the wicked workers of iniquity, but also God's majestic kingdom rule extended over the entire earth in all its glory. End quote. And I duped you a little bit there. That quote isn't from the same article from 2005. That quote from a group of men that don't, talk about doomsday or destruction, that came to us from the October 1st Watchtower, page 366, in the year 1950. And I couldn't help but think, that's one hell of a hurricane. Thanks for the warning. 74 years in advance, huh? Oh, and it still hasn't gotten here. So 74 years and ticking. And while we laugh, just think of the people who've lived their entire lives under the umbrella of the governing body of Jehovah's Witnesses in a constant state of fear. They lived all those 74 years since 1950 wondering if they were even good enough to survive. Most of them are gone. But the fear they lived with is real. And if you want to test this in 2024, this whole doomsday thinking approach to getting people to join your organization, look no further than how Jehovah's Witnesses react to every tragic world event. From 9/11 in the United States to COVID earthwide, to every earthquake, to every war. Jehovah's Witnesses ratchet up the anxiety, believing it all means, the end is here, doomsday has arrived, only to drift back into disappointment and complacency as the clock just keeps moving forward. But every time there's a tragedy in an organization that's filled with good news, they take every one of those events and they use them as a foundation of proof that they're the only true religion. And all of this leads back to one place: the governing body of Jehovah's Witnesses, also known to them as the faithful and discreet slave. And again, I'm going to say it. It goes back well over a century. The emotional abuse, the gaslighting, the fear-mongering. Fear, and the proof of it, is everywhere in this organization. From the Watchtower of 2015, May 1st, pages 6 through 8, is the end near? They have a box in the article, a highlighted box, with the title, Doomsday Prophets? ? We are told this, quote, Jehovah's Witnesses are not doomsday prophets. They've been sharing a positive message about the future for over 100 years. For example, their 1958 convention talk, God's Kingdom Rules, Is the World's End Near?, explained that God's kingdom comes not to destroy this earth, but to destroy Satan's world. End quote. But, despite claiming they don't peddle doom and gloom and they aren't a doomsday cult, the governing body has cornered the market on doom for over a century. It's all about doom for anyone that isn't one of them. And they teach Jehovah's Witnesses from the time they're born, if they can get them that young, this entire concept. When you're the official prophets of doom, your version is the best version. In fact, when you're proclaiming doom, you should actually be happy about it. That's what witnesses are told. From the Watchtower of 2019, September, pages 8 through 13, under the aptly titled series, Armageddon is Good News, we are told this, quote, have you heard people apply the word Armageddon to nuclear war or an environmental disaster? In contrast, what the Bible says about Armageddon involves good news, a cause for happiness. End quote. Doom and destruction for the vast majority of mankind is a time to throw a party. It's good news, time to be happy. From the Watchtower of 75, September 1st, pages 515 to 516, what will Armageddon really mean for mankind? We're told, quote, did the horrors of World War I and II, for example, clean up the bad system of things and provide the foundation for a righteous world? God's war at Armageddon is the best thing that could possibly happen to our globe because it will do just that. End quote. The coming doom to billions of people is a time to be happy, according to the governing body, and it's the best thing that can happen to the planet. And so this subject fascinates me. It fascinates me. And even then, I can see that even I still bear the scars of what was planted inside my head as a kid among Jehovah's Witnesses. A doomsday approach to life. For a group of men that have 8 million plus obeying them, that claim they don't preach doom, they sure preach a lot of doom. I just gave details from their literature, including how they plan on killing people. The very 9 guys that write this stuff. And when your entire message leveraging a book that features death and mayhem to those that don't agree with the book, or you for that matter, well, there really isn't any way around it, is there? No matter how long they've been gaslighting all of us. They're doomsdayers. They're doomsdayers. And their version of doom, gloom, and mass destruction and mayhem is the best. So I got to tell you, as I wrap this up, I'm back to channel surfing Netflix tonight. Wait a minute. As I surf here, I notice, what's this end of the world movie featured here called Leave the World Behind? What's that? Any chance it's about an apostate who ditches a cult and a publishing company and its 9 leaders who all spend hour after hour robbing people of life and potential? Is that what the movie's about? Leave the world behind? Wait a minute. Yeah. Yep. Nope. I just watched the preview and read the description. I don't know. Something about technology, the end of the world, people dying. Yeah. I got to tell you, with that, I am turning off the television. I've heard this story before. I want to thank you all for listening this week. Kind of depressing, I know. Don't put a lot of weight in it. Wherever you may be, until we're back together, be well.